This video will demonstrate the routine for setup and use of the ADOC command. We'll start the ADOC command by typing it on the command line, and the auto documentation setup dialog box appears. First we'll look at the upper left window, which indicates our setup of the layout tabs, also known as paper space. So the first tab that we'll have set up in here is fabrication for notes and stack up. Our second one will be fab slot patterns. Our third one will be fab Gerber. Fourth one will be fab critical dimensions, and the final sheet or layout tab will be assembly. Returning to our first tab of fab notes and stack up, we see that we have a few columns listed in the window. The first column is viewport name, which is the name that will be assigned to the viewport that is created for that tab. The second column is viewport title, which is the text that will appear underneath the viewport as it is created. The third column is layers and viewport / detail file, which lists the layers that are used within that viewport. And the final column is top bottom, which this one is set to top for a top view. If we wanted a bottom view, we could select this and pick bottom to have a bottom view of that detail. In the next section to the right, layers and selected viewport, we can see that we have a listing of layers that corresponds to the layer listing in the column for the first tab. At the bottom of this window, we can select layers, which will bring up a select layers for viewport dialog box that we can select or deselect layers to be used. We also have a clear layer list, which if I press that, will clear all the layers from the listing. The rightmost window shows us LX configurations and gives us a listing of each one that is set up in the LX configuration. I can let this list fly out, and I could also select GDS configurations or Gerber configurations. Depending on which configuration I want to use, I can press the button to use all layers in a viewport, or make a viewport from what is selected, or make a sheet from what is selected. The first step in setting up automatic documentation is to create sheets, whether from the Make Sheet button under the Layers in Selected Viewport section, or going into the Sheets section and creating them from scratch. Looking further at the Sheets section, if I press the Clear Current button, this will remove all the listings from the current sheet. If I press the Delete All button, this will remove all sheets from the listing window. If I press New, this will allow me to start the new creation of a new sheet. If I press Delete Current, this will delete the current sheet, and the Move Left and Move Right buttons are used for aligning left or right the tabs in the proper order. Also down here is a Load Rename Current, which keeps track of the name of the tab that was listed in there and saves this as a subroutine of the master configuration. As each sheet is completed, we can press the Save Current button, which will save the configuration for that sheet. Once a sheet is initialized, we can move to the Viewport section and press on the New button, which will give us a new viewport listing. We can also press the Delete button, which will delete any of the viewports. And again, we can do the Move Up, Move Down, which will put the order correctly for each of our viewports. If multiple viewports were set up for this sheet and we wanted to add a specific layer to each of those viewports, we could let this list fly out, select the layer that we wanted, press the Add button, and it will add that layer to each of the viewports in the listing. And as with the Sheets section, we do have a Save Current button down here, which will allow us to save the setups that we have for the viewports. Next section we'll look at is Formats, and we'll press the Configure Formats by Sheet button. And the Formats and Attributes dialog box appears. In the Formats and Attributes dialog box, we can see we have several columns listed. First column being Sheet, which lists our layout or sheet names in alphabetical order. The second column is Lock. Once the Create Viewports button is pressed and the viewports and sheets are created, we can come back in here and press the Lock button to enable that. This will lock down that specific sheet so that no matter what changes are made in here, and create viewports is run again, that sheet will not change. The third column of format allows us to select the formats that we want to use for our sheets. For the assembly here, I will change this one from a D2 to a D format and press open. The fourth column, scale, will allow us to set the scale of the viewport in reference to the sheet size. The next two columns of X space and Y space indicates the spacing that will be used between each of the viewports on that specific page. The seventh column of text size indicates the text height that will be used for each of the viewport names. The eighth column is text offset. This indicates how far the text will be offset from the viewport itself. The next two columns of corner X and corner Y indicate the starting point for the initial viewport that will be set into the sheet. The 11th column of extents/PCB allows us to select whether we want the viewport to use the PCB as the limits or use the extents of the layers that are selected for that viewport. The final column is VP scale. This indicates the scale of the viewport in reference to the extents that we had set, whether PCB or the full extents of the layers that are included with that viewport. Once the setup is complete in formats and attributes, we can go ahead and press the OK button and return to the Auto Documentation Setup dialog box. The next thing we'll look at is setting up detailed drawings and notes for each of the sheets. So we'll come down and we'll press on the Configure Detailed Drawings button, and the Configure Detailed Drawings dialog box appears. In the top window, we see we have tabs arranged in alphabetical order of the sheet names that will be used in the setup. For this one, we will go to Fab, Notes, and Stack Up, and we see that we have two drawing names for insertion in here. The first one will be for our notes, which will be located in the upper left corner, and this gives us our X-Y positions of where we want to locate that, and also a scale that it will be inserted in. Second one down is for our layer stack up drawing, and again the XY coordinates and the scale that will be inserted as. To add a new detail listing to the sheet, I can just press on the New Detail button and it'll add a new entry for me. If I didn't want that entry in there, I could select it and press the Delete Detail button. To get rid of all the details on here, I could press Delete All Details from the sheet, and if any of the paths had changed for any of these inserts, I could press the Update Paths button and get all of those updated. Next section down is for setting up tables within the sheet. For this one, we'll use the Fab-Slot Patterns sheet for the setup. First column indicates function, and we see that it's listed as slots. If I select on this, it gives me a flyout of where I can pick either slots or parts. The next two columns of X and Y allows us to enter the coordinates for our X and Y positioning of that table. The next column of text style, I can select a text style that has been predefined, or I can leave this blank and it will use the default within the drawing. Next column is text size. I can enter a value in here if I want something other than the default. For this, I'll leave it at 0 and it will use the default that's set within the drawing. Next column over is max height, which refers to the height of the table being inserted into the drawing. If I leave the settings set at 0, I will get a table of continuous length showing all listings in one continuous column. If I set the height to a specified value, I can split the tables out of equal length side by side across the drawing. The next column is split gap. This refers to the spacing between the tables if they are set up to be equal length and side by side. Moving down to the Tables button, if I press on New Table, this will give me a new entry for creating a new table. If I select on one of these and press Delete Table, it will take that table off the listing. If I have several listings in here and I want to delete all of them, I can press Delete All Tables from Sheet. Once this is set up, we can just go ahead and press the OK button. Next, we'll move over and examine the Data Storage Location button, which I'll go ahead and press at this time. and we see the Dock Setup Data Storage dialog box appears. I'm going to go ahead and check Use XML Format because I wish to save my settings in XML format. If there was a file that I wanted to load up from XML, I could select XML file, and this will give me a browser to select the file that I want to load. So from here I'll just press OK, and then I'll use the Save button, and this will save the master configuration of all my setup on here, and my XML file is updated. Next we'll look at Show Preview. If I check this will bring up the viewport preview window for me, which I'll slide off to the side, and this shows me the viewport that's in Fab Substrate. If I pick on Fab Slot Patterns, I can select the first one, and it gives me my view there. Select on the second one listed, and the third one. It gives me the view for each viewport. So I'm done with this. I can do Close and uncheck that box. If during the setup of the configuration I wanted to drop out and do something in the model, I can go ahead and press the Exit button, which will save within the drawing the settings that I have made. If I wanted to drop out without saving anything, I could just press Cancel. And if I wanted to delete any tabs that had been created during a previous run of ADOC, I can press Delete Layouts and all those tabs will be removed. Once we have the complete configuration, we can go ahead and press Create Viewports and allow the program to go ahead and create the tabs for us and the viewports. And now we can see that we do have our tabs in here. Layout 1, I could select this since it's not needed, and I can do a delete on that. Now we can take a look, and we do see we have the detail for our layer stack up. We have our notes, we have our top view. Switching over to Fab Slot Patterns, we can see we have our slots. We have radius notes in here as to what each of the radiuses are. And we have our viewports for each of the views in there. Switching over to Fab Gerber, we see all of our Gerber patterns. Fab Critical Dimensions shows us our layouts with our critical dimensions. And the assembly will appear with a parts list in it. And this concludes ADOC demonstration.